A tribute to Professor Roddam Narasimha, one of India's greatest scientific minds, a person who redefined CSIR-NAL. Due to the pandemic situation, Professor Narasimha's family, Mrs. Nidima Narasimha and Dr. Maitreyi Narasimha have joined us online. We thankfully acknowledge their presence. I am Venkatakrishnan. As a former doctoral student of Professor Roddam Narasimha and current member of the CSIR family, it's my honor and privilege to conduct this event. We begin with paying our respects to Professor Roddam Narasimha in the form of a floral tribute. The strong foundation of CSIR-NAL laid by Dr. P. Neelakantan and Dr. S.R. Valluri, Professor Narasimha built an impressive edifice whose reach to every area of aerospace engineering was emphasized by his grasp. In the following 5-minute video, we shall relive a few of those moments which, while doubtlessly familiar to most of the audience, bear retelling. Today, as CSIR-NAL stands poised to assume the mantle of lead agency for civil aircraft development in India, we look back on Professor RN's prophecy that it would play a pivotal role in Indian civil aviation. We now request the DG CSIR, Dr. Shekhar Mande, to say a few words.
Thank you very much. All the luminaries who have gathered here, members of CSIR-NAL family, and also Professor Narasimha's family. The occasion is somber, but we gathered to celebrate Professor Narasimha's ideals, his thoughts on how aviation can be developed in the country. I knew Professor Narasimha when I was a student. He did not know me, but I knew him when I was a student in ISC in the mid-1980s. And I had attended also as a student a few of his talks then in the mid-1980s. And he was already very popular among the students even since then that I knew him of. But I knew him more closely in the last few years, especially after my move to Delhi, that I came into contact with him much more closer. And I met on a few occasions in Bangalore and in some other places. And every time, every meeting with him was always very enriching. Every time I came back with new thoughts, actually he told us about the Indian civil aviation industry. This film that we saw just now has captured very well his own contributions, not only to NL, but also generally development of aviation in India. It's absolutely fantastic. It's a very well thing to actually have captured that particular one. There are many people here in the audience here who knew him much more closely and would have personal reminiscences about him. People like Dr. Mashak, people like Srinivas Bhogle, who have known him very closely over decades. So to hearing from them more about Professor Narasimha. But in my own way, I would like to pay tribute to him on behalf of entire CSIR family to the vision that he created, not only for CSIR-NAL, but also in general for India's science and technology and the internationalization of our science. Thank you, Professor Narasimha. You live within all of us. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Dr. Mande. Under Professor Narasimha's directorship, NAL took the first steps in flying the light canard research aircraft, which led to the two-seater Hansa 1, 2, and Hansa 3. Professor R.A. Mashelkar was DG CSIR when on 11th May 1998, the flight of Hansa 3 took place. We request Professor Mashelkar to say a few words.
Thank you very much, Mrs. Narasimha, Maitri Narasimha, and friends, colleagues, admirers of this great icon, Roddam Narasimha, my dear friend. It is hard to think that he is no more amongst us. My association with him goes back to mid-80s, when then Prime Minister Rajiv Gandhi formed the Science Advisory Council to the Prime Minister under Professor Sena Rao's chairmanship. And I was a member of that Science Advisory Committee to the Prime Minister. And as luck would have it, anytime the government changed and they formed either SAC PM or SAC Cabinet or whatever advisory committee for the next 30 years, both he and I would continue to be members of these committees. It was a fascinating association with him. I must also say that for 4 years, 1989 to 1993, for 4 years, he was the director of National Aerospace Laboratory and I was the director of National Chemical Laboratories. We used to interact together as CSR directors. I think God has specially made him. I mean, I cannot describe the kind of qualities that you can have in a single person. The film is very impressive, but I think we must add to the difference that he has made in policy making in the country, making a difference to the entire nation. In fact, I was not there in that meeting. People told me what happened when Rajiv Gandhi asked, well, we are a poor nation, but there must be something good in us. What can we do? And somebody has told me, it was Roddam who said, we can use this. We are smart in this. Then Rajiv Gandhi said, what can we do with it? And that was the time he talked about parallel processing architecture-based high-performance supercomputers. His argument at that time was that, look, everywhere people are ahead of us, this is where all of us are starting at the same level and we can win. And that is how the STAC was formed, $10 million, 3 years under Dr. Vijay Bhatkar. But before that, of course, he had created Flow Solver demonstrating our capability. So that was his sort of vision. And I must say that when I sat on the Science Advisory Committee to the Prime Minister, I saw his vision. You know, they say innovator is one who sees what everybody else sees, but thinks of what nobody else thinks. Roddam had that very special capacity to think of what nobody else thought. So lots of great ideas came up, you know, like the creation of Technology Development Board, Technology Information Forecasting and Assessment Council. At that time, we also had this idea of National Science Foundation. Unfortunately, it didn't get formed for a long time. And it came in a different form altogether than what was envisaged. But take all these ideas, even their origin in what Roddam had said. So that's a great contribution which we need to actually capture because to make a difference, not just to NAL or not to the nation. The other point I want to sort of recollect is like Shekhar rightly pointed out, his love for this entire civil aviation enterprise of the country and his vision that yes, we can do it, we can build our own aircraft, etc. I had numerous discussions with him. Actually, he always used to say that a 1,000-mile journey starts always with first few steps. And that is where this light aircraft, the research aircraft, was a first step, basically, from NAL. Then came that Nalla, NAL, flight aircraft, and then came ANSA 1, ANSA 2, ANSA 3. And as was rightly pointed out, I was the DG when the maiden flight of ANSA 3 took place. And that turned out to be a historic day, by the way, 11 May 1998. I remember Professor Dasi was very much there at that time. And when the flight took place, and in the afternoon, we got the news that Trishul of DRDO, the missile, that test was done. And in the evening, Dr. Murli Manohar Joshi, the then Chief Minister, the Minister of Science and Technology, was chairing a meeting, and suddenly he got a chit, and it was about Pokhran 2. So we went out. I mean, everybody jumped with great joy. I still remember that great moment in NAL. I think when NAL's history is written, you should write down that moment on 11 May at 7 o'clock in the evening when all 40 directors jumped in joy. And I remember sitting with Dr. Murli Manohar Joshi and saying that, look, 3 great events have taken place in technology. Let's call it a technology day. Of course, he agreed, but eventually we clinched the issue when we were giving the Bhatnagar Prize in National Physical Laboratory. You know, Prime Minister was sitting here on the one side, Dr. Mulimana Joshi on the other side, me, and then we raised the issue, and Atalji straight away declared this as a technology day. So that was a great day, by the way, and NL should remember it. And it was possible because of Hansa 3 and our inspiration, and that was possible because. The other thing I want to talk about is the fact that he had this idea of civilian aircraft, and that is where Saras was born, by the way, the idea of Saras. And Shekhar, nowadays, 100 crore will look very small to you. But at that time, that was the first 100 crore project, 131.4 crore project that we took to the cabinet. You know, we created a record that, thanks to Saras. And I remember when that was passed in the evening, I got a call from Roddam congratulating me. And I said, Roddam, don't congratulate us. We are all grateful to you for giving us this vision. And this is our tribute to you. I know I've been given 5 minutes, so in 1 minute I'll finish. I must say that we formed a mutual admiration society, if you like. And I remember I have preserved that, by the way, the message that he sent to me on my 60th birthday in 2003 when it was celebrated in NCL. And I will read out that message because it is so special to me. He said, a flair that is uniquely his own, one of the finest things that has happened to CSIR, valiant fighter of protecting traditional knowledge system of this country in new ways and in the new century. And finally, he said, Mashilkar's CSIR has the 21st century written all over it. I'm very proud to say, Shekhar Mande's CSIR has also 21st century written all over it. CSIR is a 21st century organization, and that was the inspiration that he had given. I consider ourselves very fortunate. I thank Almighty God that he became a part of CSR family and he led NL to an extent where I remember in my very first visit as a DG of CSR, I've written in my own, and I hope it is there somewhere. I said CSR is a Kohinoor. It's a Kohinoor in the crown of CSR, and that's what NL has been. And we are very grateful to them for giving us that leadership. Finally, I would say that Roddam was not an individual; he was an institution. You know, and individuals go, but institutions will live forever. So Roddam, the institution, will live forever. I pay my tributes to this great son of India, a unique son of India, a legend of India, and also give my heartfelt condolences, me, my wife, Vaishali, and all of us, to Mrs. Narasimha, Maitri Narasimha, and his entire Narasimha family. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Professor Mashelkar. The CSIR Center for Mathematical Modeling and Computer Simulation, CMAX, today CSIR 4Pi, was born in 1988 due to the vision of Professor Vinod Gaur and Professor R. Narasimha, who were then the director of the National Geophysical Research Institute and director of NAL respectively. It was conceived as an institution for developing expertise and computing facilities to tackle big modeling problems in scientific fields. We request Dr. V.K. Gaur, former Secretary, Department of Ocean Development, to say a few words. Dr. Gaur.
We just seen a video presentation which quite clearly repeats what is available in countless publications and documents as to how multifaceted Roddam Narasimha's persona was. But from whichever angle you look at him, a few things never change. His winsome smile, shone by a profound sensibility, and his deep humility. The true values of science, which in my estimation make him the finest scientist human being of my generation. I do not recall when I first met him, but the meeting is vivid in my memory. It was after a talk he had delivered, outlining the concept of an experiment to study the Indian monsoons and its dynamics through the boundary layer that exists between the Earth's surface, which is solid but thermodynamically active, and the atmosphere above the boundary layer, which is about a kilometer or so further above our heads. The general content and presentation of that talk was mind-boggling to me, because it not only evocatively showed how the boundary layers are the windows for looking deeper into the process of nature, but also as sources of imaginative designs of experiments as to how to investigate that part of the nature. I was so fascinated by this concept, which I later, with conversations with him, was to learn, extends to other situations, like the boundary layer between the exergy and the entropy of chaotic systems, where there is a lot of useful, random noise that exists. And he would study in time the boundaries between the constructive part of this random noise and the destructive part, and also learn how to control the destructive part. So I was so fascinated by all this. And not least, of course, the boundary layer between tacit knowledge and deduced knowledge, which he would later employ in very imaginative ways. So when there was an opportunity to buttonhole him after the talk, I just voiced my fascination by the concept that he had put the first large-scale atmospheric experiment anywhere in the world that he has conceived, and which was later carried on here. But I told him I know nothing of fluid physics. And upon my reply as to what kind of physics I did, which was seismology, dealing with the fundamental equations of conservation of momentum and energy, that's a Navier equation of elasticity. He said, oh, fluid physics is just that equation. You take away your approximation that you make for the total derivative, and you will get the advective component, and that's what makes it a fluid equation. And then he asked me that since I talked of conservation, he persisted, did I know as to where that principle came from? I, of course, didn't. And he said, it just sprang from the two canonical laws of nature. The parsimony, which means nature always uses the economy of means to perform its processes, the Fermat's law, the trajectory of the parabola, and many examples. And symmetry. And then he told me the fascinating story that was unfolded in the 1930s by a much wrong but highly imaginative woman in Göttingen called Emmy Noether. In a flash, I had understood fluid physics, and I saw Bernoulli's processes everywhere, particularly in the Earth system, in the flow of glaciers, in avalanches, debris flows, and the oceans and atmosphere. I had come away from that meeting greatly enriched, and I gained a friend whom I can only describe as being a catalyst for joy. And the joy came whenever we had the occasion to meet from the thought experiments we used to carry out. Making Bernoulli toys was one, since my eyes were opened to Bernoulli principle by Roddam Narasimha at our first meeting. And some deep questions of logic and philosophy. What were the canonical principles, for example? Parsimony and symmetry that I have just mentioned. Can we think of examples that cannot be deduced from these? We spent many meetings, thinking about such things, and so forth. And every time I came from these meetings, I found that I learned so much. I looked at that, been able to see at the world in different ways. And I said, every time I came, I feel very humbled. One of the perennial themes that we used to return to was the theme of symmetry and how important it was for us to understand its implication. Something that the universe wields without any exception, and something which, for some reason, the physicists did not understand or did not use it explicitly until Einstein showed them how the apparently inconsistent view of electromagnetism could be resolved just by assuming symmetry. So that was the first time it happened, and Roddam showed me many examples of it happening everywhere, and a powerful tool of conceptual design, whether it is of artifacts or of experiments or even of theory. And you often use this to cook a theory. Indeed, there was a lecture I heard from him which was cooking a theory in order to explain something. Roddam was at once a universalist and a quintessential Indian, a valuer of the past and a seer for the future. The past not for boasting, but as a reservoir of profound ideas and strengths with which to forge the future. I learned the joy of regressing to canonical principles from Roddam, how to go back from whatever experiences we have gained, whatever we have learned, whatever we have lived, to the quintessential canonical principles, the bindu of Indian aesthetics, from which to spiral out again with new offerings to the world. This came naturally to Roddam. He thought of impossible achievements, and he had the imagination to design systems which will make it a possibility. One of the very first principles of logic we used to debate and explore is the principle of existence and non-existence of that entity at the same time and place. Logicians start with this simple law of non-contradiction called P and not P, cannot exist at the same time. Today at this meeting, remembering of Roddam, this principle seems to be denied. He is not in our midst.
Thank you, Dr. Gaur. Professor Narasimha conceptualized and nurtured the light transport aircraft Saras when he was at NAL, and Dr. T.S. Prahlad, NAL's fifth director, took it forward, culminating in the first flight of the Saras on 29th May 2004. Dr. T.S. Prahlad is currently in the United States and has sent a recorded message, which we shall now play.
All the distinguished people participating in this tribute to Professor Roddam Narasimha, RN for many of us, I am happy to participate and pay my humble respects to one of the great sons of India. RN, who left us on 14th December, was a very special person. He was internationally known for his research and expertise in fluid mechanics. He was a learned teacher. He was a great visionary contributor to important aerospace programs to the country. He was a person with deep knowledge of Indian culture, history, and its philosophical and scientific traditions, with a good mastery over Sanskrit. He was a molder of people, institutions, and values. In short, he was an intellectual giant. It is impossible to capture him in any short tribute. Therefore, I will confine myself to a few intersections in our trajectories. I have known RN since I was a second year ME student in aeronautical engineering in 1962 when he taught us a course on turbulence, a difficult subject on which we could see his mastery. During my PhD days with Professor Satish Dhawan, we used to have many discussions. Especially, we used to look forward to the 3 p.m. tea breaks when RN used to walk into the high-speed lab and engage us in a variety of topics, technical as well as general. We all enjoyed his deep insight on any topic he took up for discussion. The next period of our close interaction was when I was at VSSC ISRO Trivandrum, which RN used to visit often for SLV review. We interacted on many aerodynamic problems and also on S1 nozzle failure, where we worked together in a review committee. His attention to detail, while always keeping the larger picture in view, was indeed remarkable. Along with Professor S.M. Deshpande, we organized the first major international conference in CFD in Trivandrum under RN's guidance. Again, interaction on the LCA program when he was Director NAL and I was in ADA is something I cherish. Of course, he was one of the prime movers in bringing the LCA program into existence, and we had his guidance throughout. When there was considerable skepticism whether India could handle the high technology features like carbon composite wing and fly-by-wire control, he had immense confidence that it could be done, provided we marshal all the national resources and talent together. Thus were born the national teams for carbon composite wing and LCA control law. He persuaded Dr. K.N. Raju and Dr. Srinath Kumar, with some effort, I suppose, to lead these teams successfully, thus showing the country the confidence he had in Indian capabilities, provided we worked together. As Director NAL, RA took many new initiatives. Conceptualizing and nurturing Hansa and Saras aircraft programs was a major one, and I had the good fortune to take this forward when I became Director of NAL, with full support from him and Dr. Mashielt. He was at a HAL control tower quite early on the morning of 29 May 2004, when the first flight of Saras took place successfully. We could see the sheer delight in his face. Later, he joined the Saras team on the tarmac with champagne flowing and hugging the project director, Dr. Narayan. Another major impact of his at NAL was the initiation of parallel computing flow solver under Dr. U.N. Sinha and using it for NAL's high computing needs and for tackling monsoon prediction, which was one of his passions. Above all, RN was a very cultured person. He was simple, informal, treated everybody with warmth and respect, always listened to various points of view, and maintained a high sense of objectivity in his opinions and decisions. We truly miss such a unique and accomplished person.
Thank Dr. Prahlad for that message. Dr. B.R. Pai had a long association with Professor Narasimha right from his Imperial College days. We request Dr. B.R. Pai, former Director CSIR-NAL, to say a few words.
Well, the video which we have seen has given a very good description of Professor Narasimha and his life. So I will just mention some of the things which have impressed me over his career. I first met Professor Narasimha in 1968 in London when he had come to deliver a lecture at the Imperial College where I was studying. A common friend brought him to my flat. Since then, we have had a long association and interaction. In many ways, he has been my role model. He stands tall amongst people who have influenced me and several people of my generation in pursuing our professional and intellectual lives. He joined NAL as director in 1984, which was a tumultuous period in the country. He guided the laboratory with a clear vision and skill. He spelled out clearly that NAL must work on futuristic problems and areas which will need an answer in about a decade ahead. He also encouraged the scientists to get sponsored projects, particularly those from advanced countries, and broaden our vision by participating in conferences. Consequently, we could start a partnership with the aero engine company Pratt & Whitney of USA and Pratt & Whitney of Canada, which went on for several years. Another memorable effort he encouraged in the propulsion division was the development of an indigenous industrial gas turbine, being a team effort with a private company, Turbotech Technologies, and sponsored by DSIR. He personally chaired several of the review meetings, and the project was successful in developing a prototype and setting up test facilities. The company even exported 2 units to South Korea. Professor Narasimha was keen that NAL be associated with the science and technology activities in the Karnataka state. He encouraged me to take up an honorary position of the Secretary of the Karnataka State Council for Science and Technology, KSCST, with its office in the IRSC. This gave me a chance to interact with several developmental projects in the state and also several engineering colleges, as well as illustrious staff members of IISc involved in a similar activity. This was a thrilling experience for me for about 8 years. A maxim which he often emphasized regarding project activities was that achieving the last 10% was the most difficult part and required a very disproportionate effort. I found this to be especially true in several projects in applied R&D institution like ours. Though ideas may work quite well in the laboratory or pilot plant stage, to actually apply them in the field and make a commercial success is indeed a formidable task. Another remarkable feature of Professor Narasimha was his multitasking abilities. While attending to complex administrative issues of running a large R&D laboratory, he managed to pursue his love for fundamental research in fluid mechanics and also helped the country through several advisory roles. We all know the stellar work he did as a member of the Scientific Advisory Committee to the Prime Minister, leading to the SARAS project. I must share with you an incident which occurred during the scouting days of the aircraft project. I happened to be acting director when Professor Narasimha had gone to Russia with a team. One day we got the news that Professor Narasimha was attacked in his hotel room in Moscow by an intruder. He was assaulted and robbed of all his belongings. We had to get many things ready, including his passport and shirts, and get it to him in Moscow. He, of course, took it nonchalantly. Who would imagine a risk like this in the course of developing an aircraft? He could spot innate talent and skills in the staff members and encourage them to the utmost, rather than a top-down approach. A good example of this was the foray into the development of a parallel computer in NAL at a stage when the activity was just starting globally. After retirement from service, Professor Narasimha could devote more time in his other passion for delving into science and philosophy in ancient India. Being a skilled communicator, he would regularly keep his audiences enthralled with his findings in these subjects. In fact, all of us at NAL would look forward for his annual birthday celebration talk organized by Dr. UN Sinha. We are indeed fortunate lot as we could experience and live with such a distinguished person, Professor Narasimha, who led such a fulfilling and satisfying life. I really cherish several memories of interacting with this great man.
Thank you, Dr. Pai. Dr. A.R. Upadhyaya was director of CSIR-NAL when the government of India asked NAL to look into the feasibility of a regional transport aircraft. He interacted very closely with Professor Narasimha on a high-powered committee set up by the government for this feasibility study. We request Dr. A.R. Upadhyay, former Director CSIR-NAL, to say a few words.
Thank you, Venkat. Mrs. Narasimha, members of Prof. Narasimha's family, and distinguished participants in this meeting. Unlike most of the speakers before me, I belong to what I would call the next generation, in the sense that I was nearly 20 years younger to Professor Narasimha. Also, I did not directly work in the field of CFD or aerodynamics, though my field of aerovelocity pretty close to it. Hence, my direct interaction with Professor Narasimha started only after I had the privilege of occupying the same chair that he once adorned with such distinction, that is that of the Director NAL. A few words to my indirect and informal interactions with him earlier. He started as a postgraduate student of aeronautical engineering in IISc during 1972 to 74. When I took his course, Gas Dynamics, we were all impressed with his immense knowledge and great simplicity. Later, as a young scientist at NAL, I saw him implement many new and innovative schemes, which were all mentioned in the video. Some of them are really important ones. Flight Research Division, started with Professor Damania from IISc at NAL. NALTEC to help transfer of technology and business promotion. So NALTEC was established at NAL by Professor Narasimha, along with the former directors and Mr. Shivaraman as the chairman. His stress on interdivisional R&D activities, then much larger interaction with universities and academic institutions, and overhauling NA report formats on the model of NASA reports, etc. It showed his knowledge in diversities, vision for the future, conviction and boldness to implement new ideas, and good planning for achieving success in those. It also showed that while he was a great scientist, he was also a man of the world. Later, when I was a scientist engineer working on the LCA program at ADA, I saw him conduct many important meetings and reviews, etc. And what struck me most again was that they were all very incisive, but he was very gentle and persuasive in his inquiries and suggestions and alternate and better ways of doing things. The designers always felt good at the end of those reviews. And I was the director, Professor Narasimha continued to support us with his advice and guidance in some of the programs with which he was already associated, or some of them he had actually started, like the flow solver, the SARA's new technology wing, CSIR new millennium programs, reviews, etc. When we celebrated NAL's Golden Jubilee during 2008 and 2009, he delivered the plenary lecture in the inaugural function on something which he firmly believed and strived for: the need for an aeronautical commission for accelerated growth of aeronautics in the country. While he felt that the civil aviation had advanced a lot in the country in the recent years, the civil aeronautics had not really gone that far, and it was very necessary to have an aeronautical commission. It's sad and unfortunate that his goal could not be achieved in his lifetime. What I consider very important was his close involvement with both technically and in administration of CSIR 70 to 90 seat RTA feasibility study program under a high power committee set up by the government. He was a member of the committee. I greatly appreciate the fact that though he was more inclined towards the development of a turboprop regional aircraft, he extended full support and valuable advice to the study aimed at a turbojet aircraft, and fully endorsed the outcome of the study, as he strongly felt that it was in the national interest. Earlier, with Dr. Kota kindly joining us at NAL with this initiative, we had started initiating R&D projects for RTA development at NAL, and Professor Aran himself had taken up some projects with his students at JNCASR. In fact, I remember one pertaining to a new wing shape in the presence of the propeller engines on the wing, taking into account the wake interactions. He was very, very enthusiastic about it. And in the RTA program, he was a member of the three-man committee to consider and approve many administrative decisions to help the study before they were actually ratified by the High Power Committee. We were also happy to have him continue to celebrate his birthdays with us at NAL every year with a special lecture by him, thanks to our colleague Dr. UN Sinha. His enthusiasm for new and innovative technologies was such that in March 2008, when NAL and ADRD Agra of DRDO jointly organized, along with the partners from USA, MAV 2008, the first US Asian demonstration and assessment of micro air vehicle and unmanned ground vehicle technology, he readily agreed to our request to be a member of the international judging panel, and even at the age of 75, spent a couple of grueling days in hot summer weather in a vast outdoor area at ADRD Agra, judging the performance of the 8 international entries as per a predefined mission involving simulated hostage rescue using micro air vehicles and unmanned ground vehicles. During the same period, I also closely interact with him as a fellow member of the board of Trust for Advancement of Aerodynamics in India, which was again the result of his vision and initiative for the need for such a body in the country. He used to participate in almost all the board meetings, and we used to have very interesting discussions on what needs to be done in the field of particularly aerodynamics. In fact, he started the Sarod symposiums and also the Spices events, comparing the different software performance within India. I must say, I remember a couple of personal events, interactions I had with him. I remember being called to his office in 1986, asked why I wanted to leave NAL and go to ADA, and I telling him that it was a challenging opportunity to work on the LCA program, and that my work at NAL was becoming somewhat repetitive. While he seemed to be satisfied with the first part of my explanation, he emphatically assured me that the work I was engaged in NAL, that of aeroelastic model design and testing for transonic buffet of launch vehicles, was a pioneering piece of work being done in India for the first time, and only NAL could do it. And it was very important for ISRO and the nation, just like the LCA program. He also suggested that I should try and write a manual on the subject of the aeroelasticity for future reference. As he was closely associated with both the LCA program and the ISRO's programs, it showed his firm belief that only NAL could actively provide advanced technology support to all the strategic national programs in the aerospace domain, sort of ready to use technologies, due to the foundational work being done here. In fact, much later, during one of our meetings in the NAL Golden Jubilee year 2009, when we were discussing the changing role of NAL, remember in those days there used to be a lot of discussion what NAL should do and should not do. He again emphasized that R&D laboratories like NAL should carefully straddle the delicate space between design and development of the industry and research and technology of the academic institutions, without leaning too much on either side, but maintaining close interaction with both, as only a R&D laboratory like NAL can develop technologies to TRLs where it can directly go on a new complex engineering system like a flight vehicle design. In fact, he was of the firm opinion that design and R&D should go hand in hand, without they should complement each other but not have conflict with each other. They should not undermine each other. He stressed this point again to me as late as January 2020, when we were informally discussing invitation for the Golden Jubilee celebrations of Aeronautical Research and Development Board, that institutions like AR&DB played a crucial role in aerospace R&D and human resource development in the country, and NAL should continue to support both basic and applied aerospace research in both civil and defense aeronautics, and so should AR&DB. We will continue to cherish sweet memories of our association with him in and outside NAL, and will continue to celebrate his many achievements. I thank Director NAL for giving this opportunity for me to participate in this meeting and pay my tributes. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Upadhyay. The systems group was a fledgling when Professor Narasimha was director, and with his nurture grew to form the National Control Law team led by Sri Shyam Chetty, the 8th director of CSIR-NAL. We request Sri Shyam Chetty, former director CSIR-NAL, to say a few words.
respected elders, invitees from far and near, dear colleagues and friends. I'm extremely humbled and honored at having been requested by Director NAL to be here on this memorable day to pay tribute to Professor RN. A visionary beyond words is how one would aptly describe Professor Narasimha's life story. Proficient in both English and Sanskrit languages, he was the perfect blend of Western and Eastern concepts and beliefs. They were the yin and yang of his scientific, technological, and philosophical thought processes. My interaction with him was rather limited when he was director of NAL and I was a greenhorn scientist in the field of flight mechanics and control. He, however, remained a beloved and frequently consulted member and guide to me even after he left NAL. The legacy he left behind as a director was a very demanding and arduous one for me to emulate. It was his enthusiasm and constant encouragement that led to NAL playing a major role in the LCA program. He formed new national teams at NAL to design and develop the highly complex carbon composite wing and equally complex fly-by-wire flight control laws and air data algorithms for LCA, two most critical, important, and strategic technologies which were denied to us by the developed world. Professor Narasimha continued to be the chairman and expert member of several important technical committees that advised and steered the LCA design and development. From launch vehicles to missiles to the light combat aircraft and more recently the advanced medium combat aircraft, there isn't a single major national aerospace program that does not have his stamp on it. As Indian citizens, we are fortunate to have in our history, time and again, men and women we are proud of and honored to call our own. Professor Roddam Narasimha is definitely one of its scientific giants, and I joined the scientific and engineering community to pay my respectful obeisance to the department. So, thank you.
Thank you, sir. As a former master student of Professor Narasimha and later of a co-PI on the first large international R&D contract to NAL, Dr. Mudkavi worked closely with Professor Narasimha. We request Dr. Vidyadhar Mudkavi, head CSIR 4.5, formerly CMAX, to say a few words.
Thank you. I first saw Professor Narasimha in 1983 when I joined my ME program. He was addressing us as the chairman of the department. I had no idea who he was, except that he looked very young with his goatee beard and the jeans he wore, which was actually very impressive for us as students. Later on, he had proposed a project on vortex methods, something that was not heard of at that point in time. So, true to his words, he would always work on something that will become more important 10 years hence. It was something I was interested in, and therefore I got on to that project. He actually wanted me to model a mixing layer using these vortex elements. Rather than the point vortices, he was asking me to do the sheet vortices. So he had that idea, like you let all these little sheets go interact and go into the flow. I had one small innovation. I had actually connected them all together. And it started showing a rolled up structure of a mixing layer. And those were the days when, like this idea of a turbulence being understood using coherent structures was very prevalent. It excited him so much, those simulations. They were extremely simple simulations. He would show it to every visitor who came to his lab, including one giant GK bachelor. So such was his enthusiasm towards his students, towards scientific results, and what one could do with simple methods. That was something, and then understand deep physics behind that. Then, of course, later on I joined NAL. My joining NAL was rather a simple decision. Being headed by Professor Narasimha, and that was a place to go for me. That's about it. So I never applied anywhere else. And I joined NAL in 1992. Actually, thanks to him that, I got to work on the NAL's first international R&D contract. And like somebody mentioned, he always believed in actually doing international R&D contracts for a variety of reasons. One is actually earned a lot of like the foreign exchange, which is very scarce in those days, and also you could actually make yourself visible elsewhere. I would actually attribute winning that contract purely to them. Because actually he was so well known throughout the world that NAL was chosen to actually grant that contract. His involvement was so deep in that particular project. He had set up a review committee in which he himself was a chairman. It was a 3-month contract, and he said the final report must go on the last date which has been given to us. No compromise on that, okay, because he was very strict about that. Every week he would take a review. Every week we would actually produce 20 to 30 pages of written material. He would go through every word, including the dots and the crosses. Famous red pen use was something that he would always go through. For 3 months, it was an exciting period for us, guided by him almost every single minute. Somebody mentioned, like I think in the video, he was a reluctant leader, which was true in some sense, because he didn't want to actually take up the position of director of NAL. When he finished his stint as a director, we were just talking to him. He said the period of NAL was extremely fatiguing for him, which only means to say that how much energy he must have put in, given his, like the stature. And that is actually the reason why I think NAL is what it is today. At least that's what my belief is. So it has been my great pleasure and honor to have been associated with him, to have done Miami project, to have been associated with him in the projects, and later as a mentor, every time we went to his place, he would spend so much time with us, so much time with us. And students always came first to him. And he always there used to be a blackboard here in this very hall. And when we were MA students and we'll come and meet him here, he'll go to the board in this very hall, explain many concepts which are still already in our head and will never go away. We miss him very much. Thank you very much for this opportunity. It has been a great honor being associated with you.
Thank you, Dr. Madhukar. Dr. Kota Harinarayana, the man who shaped India's dream of building its own light combat aircraft, is often referred to as the father of the LCA. Who better than him to say a few words about the Pitama, Professor Narasimha, who conceived of the plan to build such an aircraft? We request Dr. Kota to say a few words.
I was a student of Professor Narasimha at Aerospace Department in University of Science, and I was a mechanical engineer from BHU. When I joined, he took a course on supersonic aerodynamics. For a fellow who knew only Bernoulli's equation, it was an order of magnitude change. And it was an extraordinary experience to listen to him, interact with him. And he instilled the love for aviation and aerodynamics, and it stayed with me all through. I was interacting with him subsequently, though not that frequently, more so in 1982 when I took over as the chief designer of HAL at Nasik Division. We were interacting with him about new aerodynamic concepts and all, and he was extremely enthusiastic, very supportive. But my interaction with him increased orders of magnitude after I took over as the program director of light combat aircraft at ADA. Soon after I took over, I met him. He was by then the director of NAL. I requested him to take over as the director general of ADA. He politely refused, but he said, as director of NAL, I will give you all support that is required for light combat aircraft. And you heard Prahlad, Pai, Upadhyaya, Shamsakti talking about it. The kind of support that the LCA project got under his leadership was extraordinary. Extraordinary. There are a couple of things which I would like to add to what has been said so far. We wanted to build a large size intake model made of composites. And test was to be done in France. The internal team at France said, you just can't make it. It's not possible. We cannot assure our tunnel may go haywire. But Narasimha said, don't worry. You give them the telling that whatever test they want to do, it will be done. And we did that. I think the composite team did a marvelous job. And they came here. And I want to mention to you, the team which came here to test and validate, they said, we have done a better design than the best design that was developed in France. It goes to the extent that the kind of confidence he had, kinds of confidence instilled in each one of us. Other important thing I would like to mention is, it's not just the wing alone. I think NAL took a lead under Subbarav's leadership and his team, that the whole composite technology, for example, co-bonded co-Q technology and many other technologies which are unique in the world have been developed. And from zero composite to 90% surface area and 45% by weight, we could achieve to this kind of a deep involvement, deep dedication that happened. We completed our project definition, and there was a problem of our definition to be accepted by Indian Air Force. It was a challenge. And Professor Narasimha chaired that meeting, and he was able to convince them that what came out as a project definition is solid, fully validated, and that has given confidence to Indian Air Force. And from the reluctance, slowly that reluctance converted into support. Took some time, but finally it happened. Today, Indian Air Force vouches for light combat aircraft and its technologies. I was interacting with him subsequently on in his another favorite and very deeply involved subject of civil aviation. In fact, in 2005, when I was the Vice Chancellor at Central University, Hyderabad, we were interacting, and there was a letter, joint letter from him and me, we sent to the Prime Minister of India, telling that there is a need to strengthen, accelerate the aviation program, and time has come for us to develop a regional transport aircraft in India, not only for India, but for the world at large. And the people had great respect for him. There was a reply from the Prime Minister to Professor Narasimha telling, certainly we'll support. And in fact, after that, and Upadhyay said, I came and landed here in NAL. And I think I continue to be in NAL now and quite a bit. And his support for civil aviation and regional transport was quite good. Irrespective of involvement and all, when a question comes to him, he will look at it unbiasedly. That is a unique and great capability. And he will tell what he wants to tell in the most soft language, but firm language. There was a question about we should go turboprop, turbofan and all that. Planning Commission has set up a committee, and the committee was headed by Professor Narasimha, and he did an analysis, and he came back and gave a presentation to Planning Commission, telling for India, the requirement is a turboprop, and we should concentrate on tech development. And subsequently, after a gap and all that, when INAE has wanted to take deeper interest and revive the whole thing, again, it was Professor Narasimha who chaired that team, that committee at here, and there was a unanimous agreement based on persuasive points put forward by Professor Narasimha, and we moved forward. It is still work in progress, but I'm sure his dream of making India an aviation powerhouse, an aviation, center for the world, I do think slowly will come through. Already in the military aircraft, thanks to LCA and subsequent projects, we have moved forward. I do believe today NAL is taking a lead role. The present director is taking a lot of inputs, interest, and I do believe that in course of time we'll get the clearances and we will be able to make a next generation regional turboprop aircraft of world standards, which will be not only liked by India, but the world over. And that would be the greatest tribute we all can pay to Professor Narasimha and his memory. A man of who can go into detail, who can also look at the global viewpoint. Very rare to find a person of that nature. And our interaction has been very close, very intense. Hardly a week has passed where we have not interacted. And I do hope all of us together will work and make his dreams to make India a superpower in aviation. And aviation, instead of becoming a drain, become a wealth generator for the country. And that would be the fittest tribute we could pay to Professor Narasimha and his memory. Thank you very much for this opportunity. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Kota. At a time when there was a systematic denial of technology to India, crippling computational efforts, Dr. U.N. Sinha, inspired by Professor Narasimha, brought to life India's first parallel computer, the flow solver, which enabled a leap forward in parallel computing technology for the country. Dr. U.N. Sinha has sent a message which will be delivered by Dr. Srinivas Bogle.
You might be surprised to see me here instead of Dr. Sinha, but that's not unusual. It keeps happening with him all the time. When Sinha says that he wants someone to do something, that gentleman has to do it. In fact, to the stage where Professor Narasimha himself, Sinha told him that 10 o'clock in the mornings on Saturdays is my time at your house. So you've got to be free and you got to come and I'm going to come and see you. I'm going to have my usual weekly chats with you. And almost every Saturday he went. On the odd Saturday when Professor Narasimha, for some reason, had some other engagement, the onus was on him to call up Sinha and say, Sinha, I'm sorry, but I'm not going to be at home today. And Sinha isn't easy he doesn't pick up phones easily and so on. So he talked to me later about several attempts that Professor Narasimha had to make. He would send him a message, he would try to call him. If not on the phone, he would try to call him on his landline and so on. But all that he was doing because he wanted to make sure that Sinha was in no way inconvenienced. That was really, absolutely extraordinary, gentlemen. We aren't going to see anyone like him. Yeah. So when I called up, when I realized that I have to talk on behalf of Dr. Sinha, so I called him and I said, well, what should I talk about? He said, I don't care what. You know me and you knew him. So you just talk about what you think I would have talked about him. So I said, I will try. Yeah, one of the first things, Sinhaji says that was his exceptional vision. In the book that we brought out, we define him to be, among many things, we call him a visionary. And one of the thoughts that must intrigue all of us is the very idea of parallel computing. Why is it that in 1984 or 85, why did a gentleman who does atmospheric sciences, fluid mechanics, why did he think of building a parallel computer? We had enough computer scientists in India at that time. So it's very strange, ironical, but not a surprise that the gentleman who first talked about parallel computing in India was not a computer scientist, but was Professor Narasimha. Because he saw through it. He saw the big picture. He saw what was going to happen later. Computing requirements were, crippling, and we had to do something about it. Those were the days when we were to get, it wasn't easy. We didn't have the money and we didn't have the ability to buy supercomputers. And especially after the Pokhran 90, which Dr. Bashelkar talked about, there was just no way that we were going to get high performance computing. So parallel computing was important, and that's what Sinha did. The other thing which Sinha would talk about a lot is how incredibly supportive Professor Narasimha was. There was nothing that he asked which he didn't get. In fact, I still recall, and this is back to the 1980s, around 6 o'clock in the evening, the NAL campus is kind of emptied out, and Professor Narasimha emerges from the director's office. He puts on his legendary dark blue, navy blue jacket. We never saw him outside on the campus without that jacket. And then he would walk across to the flow solver lab, which was, in a kind of a basement where earlier Damania and others were trying to build the light combat, LCRA, not combat, but the light canard research aircraft. He would go down there. Sinhaji would know that he's coming, and a lot of people would be working there. And then, they would have their lemon tea, they would talk, there would be discussion on anything, direct numerical simulation, 2D monsoon modeling, it didn't matter what. There was always something very interesting, attractive to talk about with Professor Narasimha, and especially with someone like Sinha who understood his maths. I mean, Sinha is incredibly capable when it comes to maths. The other thing that Sinhaji would talk about, and I would like to reiterate, is Professor Narasimha's immense faith and belief in science. I mean, we've heard him say a couple of times, what would my life be? Where would I be in this world if there was no science? So he was passionate about science and had great faith in it, and he was very confident about it. He said, if there is a way to do it, we probably will do it. He was an eternal optimist. The last thing about the birthday lecture, and well, Sinhaji, everyone here, I think we've had 5 or 6 of us here talking about the birthday lecture and how it started. Well, one more of Sinhaji's whims and fancies. He said, it's your birthday and you shall talk. But he said, wait a minute, it's my birthday, isn't it? He says, that makes no difference. You've got to come here and you've got to talk. In fact, later, we had over a dozen birthday lectures. And at one point, he said, he never could refuse anything. So he had his ways of trying to wriggle out. So he said, Sinha, are you sure you want me to talk? He said, absolutely sure, you've got to come. And you can say no to Sinha. And thank God he didn't say no to Sinha. Because some of the most enjoyable memories that we have at NAL are indeed his birthday lectures. So, yes, on behalf of Sinha, I suppose, on behalf of all of us, we miss him badly. Yeah, that's it.
We thank Dr. Sinha for the message, and thank you, Dr. Bogle, for communicating it. Dr. Srinivas Bogle, analyst and information scientist, formed the Information Management Division at CSIR-NAL for archival, retrieval, and dissemination of research work. This process was not only heavily influenced by Professor Narasimha, Dr. Bogle is also the unofficial chronicler of CSIR-NAL in addition to the aerospace events in the country. We invite Dr. Bogle, former head IMD, to speak a few words.
Okay, thank you. So I'm back as myself now. Yeah. When we are faced with a difficult situation, when we are faced with a fairly immense tragedy, we have to find ways to rationalize. There is grief, and we've got to find ways to get out of it. So one of the things that I told myself, and I think it gave me a fair amount of relief, was that it's true that he lived to be 87 and 5 months and something, but he lived the life of a 125-year-old. He did so many things in life. In our book, Ravi Nanjude at one point says, I just can't imagine that one man could do so many things. Well, that one gentleman did so many things. And that's why I like to believe that, he had not 87 years plus something, but he had 125 years of lifetime. We are privileged. We should be grateful that we had him with us for all these years. My own personal interaction with him, I had joined NAL just a couple of months before he was to join. Dr. Valluri hired me as an ad hoc scientist. And he told me quite clearly that I won't be there to regularize your position. It's going to be either very probably Roddam Narasimha if he agrees, but otherwise it will be Pramod Paranspe, one of these two gentlemen who will be your next director. Of course, Professor Narasimha, with a little bit of intrigue on the part of Professor Satish Dhawan, who sent him his car and made sure that Professor Narasimha did turn up for the interview. And as soon as he was physically present, there was no doubt that he would become the next director of NAL. So he showed up. I think he was in Caltech or Cambridge at that point. So although he joined only in the middle of October, 84. So that's when I came to know him. And one of the first things I did was, I didn't know how to introduce myself. So I wrote him I'd written an article on the introduction to operations research. So I just sent it to him. And I thought maybe he might read it and, maybe he might have something to say to me. And to my surprise, the next day when I returned to office from the director's office, I get a piece of note. It was his note saying, I read your paper. I liked it. And of course, he had more comments about it than what I might have written. But that was his style always. I mean, he read that much, but he commented so much more. So it was nice. It was nice. So that is really how I established contact with him. And I used to be a part of, information. I think the role of information now, big data, AI is getting a lot bigger. But those days, you were quite in a corner in the lab. So you were just doing some things and, well, that was what I was doing. But a couple of things that, among the first things he came and figured out was that there aren't enough technical publications at NAL. So he said, we have to set up a system of a complete internal documentation system. And as is his style, he, when he decides something, the idea is superb, and now he's got to find the right person who sort of delivers a report, a procedure, an algorithm about how you might do this. So in this case, he of course asked Dr. Sundar. I think Sundar is here. I can see his name here. So he asked Sundar to make a blueprint of how NAL's, internal documentation system should be organized. Sundar, in his own efficient and wonderful way, did that, and then he handed that over to me and said, implement it. Anything that he asked you to do, it was wonderful that he asked you to do something. And it was even more wonderful to do it in a manner that would sort of give him some joy. So, yeah, I remember working pretty hard on it. And I think we set it up. I mean, it's just, the main reason was that once the word goes out inside the lab that the director likes to see your publications, and he's reading them, and actually he's responding, he's reacting, he's sending you back with great new ideas. Then the whole picture changes. So people started, we had 50 documents in 1984, 85. In about a year, we had jumped to 250. The other thing I discovered was that he was himself a superb writer. I mean, once for some occasion, he gave me a book and he said, read about how we can write good English. And he said, please make sure you return that book because the book belongs to his father. And I wouldn't want to lose that book. So I had a look at that book. And of course, there was a book. It was a nice book. But more than that, more than annotations that he had written almost as much as his guiding notes about how to write compared to what the author himself had written. So that was him setting up systems, information systems. Later we came up with the weekly calendar of events for NAL. Then we came up with the information pasteboard, which I think was a wonderful idea because it kind of forced you to document every week something happening in NAL. So a week is nothing, but when you put that together for 10 years or 20 years, you start getting an inkling of what the history might be. So that was wonderful. And again, when he was when he was in the SAC PM, which again, Dr. Mashelkar talked about, all the reports of the SAC PM were produced out of NAL. And anything that was produced out of NAL meant that he kind of gave it to me and I had to work on it. And they were excellent reports, outstanding reports. Somewhere, you see his touch. His writing was excellent. But occasionally I used to feel that, when he has a choice between flair and rigor, he would prefer rigor. But that's not surprising. He's such a top professor. It reached a point where I thought, he couldn't write sort of floral prose just for a change. But then we saw Verses for the Brave. Phenomenal writing. I mean, it was poetry. I mean, he says it's verse, but it was poetry. Extraordinary. Finally, listening to, not just his birthday lectures, I believe I must have heard 50, 60 of Professor Narasimha's lectures. Each lecture was enjoyable. I must confess that towards the end, he tended to get a little slow with his lectures. He still had everything to say, but some of us who were his intense admirers, we just felt that the age was showing a little bit. But it was always wonderful to listen to his lectures, and he was so different. I mean, because of the Foundation Day lecture series, we had so many wonderful lectures at NAL. We had first Foundation Day lecture was given by C.N.R. Rao. C.N.R. Rao was all velocity, speed. Within 5 minutes, he had made an impression. We had Professor Mashelkar talking to us. Mashelkar was, optimism, gush, praise everyone and, make everyone feel on top of the world. And that was his style. Professor Narasimha started slowly, he was a little laid back, but then the lecture would grow on you. So it's a bit like what? It's a bit like a great cricket innings by Rahul Dravid. So, yeah, that was Professor Narasimha. Remarkable gentleman. We're going to miss him. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Bhogle. We now request Director CSIR-NAL, Sri Jitendra Jadhav, to say a few words.
This is Narasimha, Maithei, and all other distinguished team. I am humbled to be here. When I joined NAL in 2016, before that when I was in ADA, I used to just see Professor Narasimha. I never had a opportunity to meet him. But I used to hear from Dr. Kota and all people that how great man he is. And when I joined, I was slightly worried to meet such a great legendary scientist, a world-renowned scientist. How to meet him and tell my what about what to take NL, how to take NL forward. So with a great, he has a passion about Saras, and he started telling how the Saras thing has happened and it is a good design, and he was always telling that we should take forward Saras project, which is the most important project for National Aerospace Laboratory as well as the country. Then I requested him, why not, sir, you chair as, because there was a lot of reluctance in the community, including Air Force and certification authorities and our own scientists themselves. So immediately he agreed, and then we had a expert committee review chaired by him. And there he has made everybody understand that what was the cause of that mishap and how now the things has been improved to take this program forward. And then the things started falling in line on everything together. And then within 1.5 years, we could able to fly SARS. He was constantly reviewing SARS, though he was not available here, but constantly reviewing on telephone with me that how it is progressing. That shows the passion and the love to the NL which he has. And he was telling always to me that this has to go for a complete regional connectivity as well as commuter connectivity. And then after first flight, he was constantly, whenever there is any Saras or Hansa events, he used to pursue whatever busy he used to attend. So that's how the love he was having to all NL projects. And then he was trying to tell me that take this forward as well as take regional transport aircraft also forward. And we had a couple of events of regional transport aircraft to take it forward, and he has given us a lot of guidance how to make papers and forward to the government and do that. And today I can say that at least government has agreed to start project definition phase. That's a great thing. One more thing he used to tell me about National Aeronautical Commission to take forward, which was his dream. And then when I joined, I found that file is lying somewhere. And then I opened that file and wrote a letter to Secretary Defense Production ki this file is not moved from last 5-6 years. Why not you move it? So then things started, and recently, just 3 months back, we had an interaction with him about how to formulate this National Aeronautics Commission law, and we have given an input to the government, and then government has considered that commission, and looks to be there are a lot of progress happened in that way, and hopefully it will come forward. So to the NL, as people said, he has a lot of contribution in his span of 9 years, but his passion was always towards aircraft and making this rural air connectivity to happen for the economical and other growth of the country. So I request DGCSIR as a tribute to Professor Narasimha to make a special announcement, and over to DGCSIR for a special announcement.
Thank you, Jadhav, for this thing. First of all, thanks all of you for joining us in this function in our remembrance of Professor Narasimha. It's a great honor for me and for CSIR as a whole to rename the Center for Civil Aircraft Design and Development, the CCAD, in memory of Professor Narasimha, to Roddam Narasimha Civil Aircraft Center. Jadhav, please take steps forward and complete the formalities. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you, sir. Thank you, sir. Thank you, sir. So I will be personally missing his guidance because he used to guide me throughout my last 5 years. And whenever I have a problem, I will just call him. And I seen never he has refused the calls. And even though he is in very busy situation, he will lift the call and tell, I will call you back. So that is how, so we will be really missing his guidance, and we will try to fulfill all his dreams. Thank you.
Thank you, Director. On this occasion, we are most happy to release a document in print and e-version which captures various moments of Professor Narasimha at NAL and some thoughts from the many people who worked with him in connection with CSIR-NAL. This flipbook was made possible by the tireless efforts of Dr. Bogle and the team of Sandeep, Shafiq and Rajshekhar at KTMD and Dr. Shivaram of ICAST. While this is in the bright Indian colors that he so liked, as former students and colleagues of RN, we hope this is up to the exacting standards as he would tirelessly correct even punctuation for the nth time. Maybe trifles for others, but RN taught us that trifles make perfection and perfection is no trifle. I request Director CSIR-NAL to kindly release the flipbook. Thank you. A link to this flipbook will be shared. We were overwhelmed by the immediate response from virtually all the people we wrote to, which reflects the love and respect that Professor Narasimha generated. On my own behalf, as a student, I observed that Professor Narasimha never doubted any student's cognitive potential to learn what he taught, which is the hallmark of a great teacher. In addition, he also trusted in the knowledge that the student already had, valued it, and created conditions for that knowledge to flourish. He will always remain a guru in the most revered Indian tradition for me. Finally, due to paucity of time, we are unable to give the floor to the very large number of people, both online and offline, who would have liked to share their thoughts about Professor Narasimha on this occasion. We request their indulgence. I will now share a message from Dr. Maitreyi Narasimha. My mother and I are both very moved by the tributes to my father and thank you all immensely. From Maitreyi and Nilima. We at CSIR-NAL are grateful for your online presence and thank you. Thank you all for attending. This brings this event to a close. Thank you.